With respect, you're a night nurse, so let the doctors handle the medicine. Dr. Ashby didn't even look at her when he said it. He said it to the room, to the father standing by the window, the way a man swats at something beneath his notice. I have 3 board certifications and 20 years at the top children's hospital in the country. She has a clipboard and an opinion, a thin smile. And frankly, she should be more worried about her own health than my patients. Now, as I was saying about the treatment plan, Grace Bellini did not flinch. She did not look down. She simply finished writing the number she'd been recording, set down her pen, and said quietly, into the expensive silence of that private room, "His fever spikes every night at the same hour. Exactly the same hour. Whatever you're treating him for doesn't do that. Something else is." And by the window, the most dangerous man in the city slowly turned around. The boy in the bed was 8 years old. His name was Leo Catalano, and for 9 days he had been getting sicker in the best private suite money could buy, surrounded by the best specialists money could hire, and not one of them could explain why. They had a diagnosis, a serious one, a frightening one, the kind that made a father go grey overnight, and they had a treatment plan built on that diagnosis, and the boy kept getting worse anyway. And the only person in that room who had said out loud the thing everyone was too credentialed or too afraid to say, that if the treatment was right, the child should be improving, and he wasn't, was the heavy-set night nurse the head of the department had just told to mind her own weight. Grace Bellini had been a pediatric nurse for 15 years, and 12 of them on nights. People misunderstood night shift. They thought it was the lesser shift, the quiet one, the one for nurses who couldn't cut it during the day. And Grace had stopped, long ago, correcting them. Because what she knew, what 15 years had taught her, was that the night shift nurse sees the things the daytime doctors never do. The doctors came in for 8 minutes on their rounds, read the chart, made their pronouncements, and went home to their families. Grace was there at 3 in the morning. She was there at the hour the fever climbed. She was there for the long, dark, honest hours when a sick body stops performing for its audience and simply tells the truth. And she had learned to read that truth the way other people read a clock. And Leo Catalano's body had been telling her, for 3 nights running, that everyone treating him was looking in the wrong direction. She was a big woman. She knew exactly what men like Dr. Ashby saw when they looked at her. Someone soft, someone slow, someone whose business was bedpans and not medicine. And she had made her peace with that misjudgment a long time ago, because it was, more often than not, the most useful thing about her. People said things in front of a nurse they'd dismissed. They let their guard down. They didn't imagine she was the smartest clinician in the room, quietly cataloguing every symptom they were too important to sit still long enough to notice. Grace had saved more lives with that invisibility than with anything else she owned. She intended to save one more with it tonight, if the boy's father would let her. Which was the problem, because the boy's father was Enzo Catalano, and Enzo Catalano was not a man accustomed to taking the word of a night nurse over a doctor with 3 board certifications. He was a man who solved problems by buying the most expensive solution available, and the most expensive solution available was standing right there in a $1,000 coat telling him to ignore her. Everything in Enzo's world had taught him that the credential was the truth, that the price was the proof, that the person everyone deferred to was the person who was right. But Enzo Catalano had also spent 9 days watching his son slip further away, while the most expensive solution money could buy assured him everything was under control. And somewhere in those 9 days, a crack had opened in his certainty. So when the night nurse said his son's fever ran on a schedule no diagnosis could explain, Enzo did the thing that would change everything. He turned away from the doctor he was paying a fortune, looked at the woman that doctor had just insulted, and said the 4 words that began the longest night of all their lives. Tell me what you see.
To understand how a night nurse ended up overruling a department head in front of one of the most dangerous men in the city, you have to go back 9 days. To the morning Leo Catalano was admitted, and to the diagnosis that everyone, including Grace, had believed at first. The boy had come in pale, feverish, his small body aching in ways he didn't have the words for. The specialists had run their tests, conferred in their low, important voices, and arrived at an answer. A serious autoimmune condition, rare in children, aggressive, but treatable if caught early. They'd caught it early, they said. They'd started the protocol immediately. The steroids, the immunosuppressants, the careful regimen that should, within days, have turned the tide. Enzo Catalano had been told his son would get better. He had written checks that would have bought a house and believed, because believing was the only thing keeping him standing, that the machine of modern medicine was going to give him back his boy. And for the first 2 days, it had almost seemed to work. Then it stopped working. Then it started, quietly, going the other way. Grace had noticed it the way she noticed everything, not in a dramatic moment, but in the slow accumulation of small, wrong things that only a person sitting at the bedside hour after hour would ever string together. The fever that was supposed to break kept coming back, and it came back on a schedule, every night between 2 and 3 in the morning, climbing like clockwork and then receding by dawn, just before the day team arrived to find him stable. A true autoimmune flare didn't keep a timetable like that. Bodies fighting the illness they'd diagnosed didn't run on a clock. But a body reacting to something introduced at the same time each day, did exactly that. She'd started writing it down, not in the official chart at first, because a night nurse contradicting a department head's diagnosis in the official record was a fast way to be reassigned off the case entirely. She kept her own log in a small notebook in her own neat hand, the temperature, the time, the exact hour the symptoms surged. 3 nights of it, and 3 nights of data said the same impossible thing, that whatever was happening to Leo Catalano was being triggered on a schedule by something nobody had written into his chart. The trouble was Dr. Ashby. Marcus Ashby was the head of the department, genuinely brilliant, genuinely accomplished, and genuinely incapable of imagining that a night nurse might see something he had missed. He'd built a 30-year reputation on being the smartest person in every room, and a reputation like that becomes a kind of armor. It protects you right up until the day it stops you from seeing the thing that doesn't fit your diagnosis. Ashby had decided what was wrong with Leo on day 1. Everything after that he interpreted to fit. The boy getting worse wasn't evidence the diagnosis was wrong, it was evidence the disease was aggressive. More steroids, adjust the dose, stay the course. And every adjustment, Grace was increasingly certain, was pouring fuel on a fire no one had correctly identified. You have to understand what I was up against, Grace would have told you if you'd ask. It wasn't that the doctors were stupid. They were the opposite of stupid. It was that they were certain. And certainty in a brilliant person is the hardest wall in the world to get a true thing through. They had a diagnosis with a name, supported by tests, endorsed by the best specialist in the city. And she had a notebook, a pattern, and a feeling. And she was a heavyset night nurse whose professional opinion, in the hierarchy of that suite, ranked somewhere below the brand of coffee Ashby preferred. And then there was Enzo Catalano. Grace had watched him for 9 days, the way she watched everyone, and what she'd seen had surprised her. She'd expected a monster. Everyone knew, in the careful way people knew such things, what the Catalano name meant, what business paid for a suite like this. And he was dangerous, she never doubted that. But what she actually saw, night after night, was a father coming apart in slow motion. A powerful man discovering the one thing in the world his power couldn't buy, couldn't threaten, couldn't fix. He sat by his son's bed at hours when he thought no one was watching, and held the boy's small hand in both of his enormous ones. And his face, in those unguarded hours, was just the face of a frightened father. Grace had nursed enough families to know that grief made all men the same size, even this one. What she didn't know yet what would take her several more nights and one terrible crisis to understand, was that Leo's mysterious nightly fever wasn't a medical mystery at all. It was a human one. Somewhere in the careful, expensive ecosystem around that sick little boy, someone was giving him something that wasn't on his chart. Not to hurt him. Grace would stake her career on that later when it mattered. But for a reason of their own, a private reason, a frightened or selfish or well-meaning reason. Someone was introducing something into Leo Catalano's body every single day, and then saying nothing, while a brilliant doctor treated the wrong illness, and a desperate father watched his son slip away. And the only person who had noticed was the one person no one in that room would listen to. But that had changed tonight, in a single sentence, because Enzo Catalano had turned away from the most expensive doctor in the city and asked the night nurse what she saw. And Grace Bellini, who had spent 15 years learning to read the truth a sick body tells in the dark, was finally, for the first time in 9 days, about to be allowed to say it out loud. She picked up her notebook. "It's going to sound impossible," she said, "so I'm not going to ask you to believe me. I'm going to show you the one thing in this room that can't lie, the clock. And then you can decide for yourself whether your son is sick or whether something is making him sick. Because those are very different problems, Mr. Catalano, and only one of them is being treated." She laid the notebook open on the rolling table, turned it so both men could see, and for the first time all night, Dr. Ashby's expression flickered. Not because he believed her, but because a written record was a thing that existed whether he approved of it or not. "This is nonsense," Ashby said. "Mr. Catalano, I really must insist. Anecdotal bedside notes are not data. They're a nurse's impressions, and with all due respect to Ms. Bellini," Grace said, "to Ms. Bellini, impressions are exactly how diagnostic errors happen. The boy has a confirmed condition. The tests are not impressions." "You're right," Grace said, and she watched the small surprise cross his face. People braced for an argument rarely know what to do when you agree with them. "The tests aren't impressions, so let's use them. Mr. Catalano, your son has had his temperature taken and logged by machine every hour for 9 days. Not by me, by the monitor. That data is in the system right now, and no one can argue it's a fat nurse's feeling because a nurse didn't write it. A thermometer did." She looked at Ashby, level and calm. "Pull the 9-day temperature log, all of it. Plot it against the hour of the day. If I'm wrong, you'll have humiliated me with my own idea, and I'll apologize and go back to my rounds. If I'm right, the machine will show you something you've been too busy to look at." Enzo Catalano did not ask Ashby's permission. He simply looked at the doctor and said, "Pull it," in a voice that had moved entire shipments of things across borders, and the log came up on the screen. And there it was. 9 days of temperature, hour by hour, machine recorded, undeniable. And when the night resident, pale, very quiet now, arranged it against the time of day the way Grace asked, the shape leapt off the screen so clearly that even Ashby went silent. Every night, between 2 and 3 in the morning, the line climbed. Every dawn, it fell. 9 nights. A perfect, terrible rhythm. A true autoimmune flare scattered randomly across the chart, the way real disease did. This did not scatter. This kept an appointment. "Disease doesn't own a watch," Grace said quietly into the silence, "but a schedule does." Something is happening to Leo at the same time every night, and the only things that happen on a schedule in a hospital are the things we do. Medications, feeds, a visitor who comes at the same time. Something is being introduced into this child's body on a timetable, and his body is reacting to it. And we have spent 9 days treating the reaction as if it were the disease, and making it worse, because the treatment for the disease he doesn't have is suppressing the very system he needs to fight what's actually wrong. Ashby's voice had lost its edge. If that were true, If there were some external agent, it would be in the chart. Every substance that enters a patient is documented. I document it. The nursing staff documents it. There is nothing on that schedule. There's nothing on the schedule we keep, Grace said. Which means whatever it is isn't being given by us. It's being given by someone who isn't writing it down. And she let that sentence land in the room and watched both men arrive at different speeds at the same cold place.
Because there is only one kind of substance that enters a child's body on a perfect nightly schedule and never appears in a single official record. Something somebody was giving him in secret. The temperature in the room changed. Enzo Catalano went very still. The stillness, Grace would later understand, that came over him right before he became extremely dangerous. Someone, he said slowly, is giving my son something, in secret, in this room, for 9 days. I think so, Grace said. She did not soften it. He was not a man who wanted it softened. I don't know what. I don't know who. I don't even know that they mean him harm. I want to be careful about that, because there are gentler reasons than the one you're thinking. And if we assume murder, we'll look in the wrong place the same way we've been treating the wrong disease. She held his gaze. But somebody close enough to this boy to reach him every single night, past your men, past the staff, without anyone blinking, has been putting something into him and saying nothing while he got worse. That's what the clock is telling us. The clock doesn't know who. It only knows when. Finding the who is the next problem. And the disease? Enzo's voice was rough. The real one. You said he's sick with something they're not treating. I think the secret substance is causing most of what we're seeing, Grace said. Stop that, and I think a lot of this gets better fast. But yes, underneath it, there's a real illness. The thing he actually came in with. And it's been buried under 9 days of the wrong treatment and a nightly dose of something nobody will admit to. We have to peel it apart. The hidden thing first, because it's the thing actively hurting him tonight. Then the true diagnosis, clean, without the noise. She closed the notebook. But none of that happens, Mr. Catalano, until we stop the steroids that are suppressing him and figure out what comes through that door at 2 a.m. And Dr. Ashby, she turned to him, not unkindly. I'm going to need you. I'm a nurse. I can see the pattern. I can't change the treatment plan or order the tests that confirm the real diagnosis. You can. I don't need you to admit you were wrong. I just need you to look at the clock with me. And Marcus Ashby, 30 years certain, publicly contradicted by a night nurse, staring at a machine-made graph that agreed with her and not with him, did the thing that, whatever else he was, made him a real doctor underneath the ego. He looked at the graph for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "The 2 a.m. spike. You said 3 nights. I want all 9 plotted, and I want to know who has badged into this suite between 1 and 3 every night." He looked at Grace, and something in him conceded a great deal in very few words. You may have caught something I missed, Ms. Bellini. We'll know by morning. And as the first crack of cooperation opened between the brilliant doctor and the nurse he'd dismissed, none of them yet understood the shape of what they were about to find. That the answer to who comes through that door at 2 a.m. was going to be far more painful than a stranger, and that the person who'd been quietly feeding Leo Catalano something every night had done it for a reason that would break the heart of everyone who loved the boy. The badge logs came back within the hour, and they narrowed the world considerably. Between 1 and 3 in the morning, over 9 nights, only a handful of people had entered Leo's suite. The rotating night nurses, of whom Grace was one, 2 of Enzo's own security men, who never came closer than the door, the night resident, and 3 people from the boy's personal circle, who had standing access at any hour. Family, in the loose way the Catalano world used that word. The badge data couldn't say what any of them had done inside,
It could only say they'd been there. The clock had told them when. It would not tell them who. For that, Grace knew, they were going to have to watch. "We do nothing tonight," she said, when Enzo's first instinct, predictably, was to haul every name on that list into a room and find out the hard way what they knew. If you frighten everyone with access to Leo, the person doing this stops. The nightly substance disappears. Leo starts to improve, and we never find out what it was or why. Which means we never know if there's a lasting harm, and we never know if they'll do it again the moment our backs are turned. Right now, they think they're invisible. That's the only advantage we have. A frightened person hides. An unsuspecting one keeps their routine. She paused. "I know about being the person nobody suspects, Mr. Catalano. It's a good place to watch from. Let's use it." Enzo studied her for a long moment. This heavy-set night nurse calmly telling the most dangerous man in the city to do nothing, to be patient, to wait. And Grace watched something reorganize behind his eyes. The same reassessment she'd seen on 100 faces over 15 years. The moment a person stopped seeing the body and started seeing the mind. "You think like someone who's had to win without power," he said. It was not quite a question. "I've never had power a single day in my life," Grace said.
When you don't have it, you learn to win with patience and attention instead. You learn to let people underestimate you until it's too late for them to do anything about it. A small, tired smile. It's slower than your way, but it leaves fewer holes in the walls. Something almost like a laugh moved through him, the first crack of anything but fear she'd seen in 9 days. And that was how the long night began. The two of them set up to watch over a sleeping boy and wait for 2 in the morning. And how, in the dark and the quiet and the terrible suspended patience of it, Enzo Catalano began, without quite meaning to talk. He talked about Leo, not the patient, the boy, the one who refused to eat anything green and negotiated like a little lawyer for 30 extra minutes before bed, and had, at 7, solemnly informed his father that he intended to be either a marine biologist or a pirate, depending. He talked about Leo's mother, gone 3 years now, and how the boy had her exact laugh, and how some nights that laugh was the best thing in his world, and some nights it was the thing that hollowed him out. He talked, a powerful man in a dim room at 3 in the morning, the way people only talk when they're too frightened and too tired to keep performing. And Grace, who had sat in this exact dark with 100 frightened parents, did what she was best at. She listened. She didn't fix, didn't minimize, didn't fill the silence with comfortable lies. She just stayed, steady and present, and let a terrified father be a person for a few hours. "You're very easy to talk to," Enzo said somewhere past 3, when the spike had come and gone, and Leo had settled, and the immediate fear had loosened its grip for the night. "People aren't, usually, around me." "People are afraid of you," Grace said simply. "I'm a night nurse. I've held the hands of men far more dangerous than you while they cried about their mothers. The job strips the costume off everyone eventually." She checked Leo's pulse, noted it, sat back down. "You're not frightening at 3 in the morning, Mr. Catalano. You're just a father who can't fix the one thing that matters. That, I understand. I've watched it 1,000 times. It never gets less hard to watch." And Enzo Catalano looked at her across the dim room. Really looked, the way he had not looked at another adult in 3 years. Not as an asset or a threat or a transaction, but as a person who had, somehow, seen straight through him to the frightened, ordinary man underneath, and had not flinched from what she found. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Something had shifted in the room, quiet and unhurried, the way the most real things always arrive. And both of them, being careful people, let it pass unremarked because there was a sick child between them, and this was not the hour for anything else. But the morning brought Dr. Ashby, and with him, the first real threat, not to Leo, but to Grace. Because Ashby had spent the night thinking, and what he'd thought about was not only the graph. He'd thought about 30 years of reputation and a malpractice exposure the size of a building if it ever came out that he'd treated the wrong illness for 9 days while the right answer sat in a night nurse's notebook. A smaller man protects the patient. A frightened, eminent one protects himself.
And sometime before dawn, Marcus Ashby had quietly decided that if this case went wrong, the story was going to be that an overreaching night nurse had interfered with a patient's care against medical advice. And he had started, carefully, building that story. "I've reviewed your notes," he told Grace in the hall, with a colleague conveniently in earshot. "I have to caution you that practicing beyond your scope, suggesting diagnoses, recommending we halt a treatment plan, exposes this patient and this institution to significant risk. I'll be documenting my concerns." A pause, pure steel under the courtesy. "For everyone's protection." Grace understood exactly what she was hearing. It was the oldest move in the world, the one she'd seen played against people like her 100 times. When the evidence turns against you, stop arguing the evidence and start building a case against the person. He wasn't going to debate the clock anymore. He was going to make her the problem, the unstable, overreaching nurse, so that whatever happened next, the blame had somewhere to land that wasn't him. And the worst part, the part that sat cold in Grace's chest as she walked back toward Leo's room, was that it would probably work, because it always had before. She had the truth. He had 30 years of credibility and a documented concern. In every contest she'd ever watched between those two things, the truth was not the one that won, which meant she now had 2 clocks running against her. The one over Leo's bed, counting down to a 2 a.m. she had to catch someone at, and the one Ashby had just started, counting down to the moment his version of the story became the official one, and the fat night nurse who'd been right became the reckless night nurse who'd been removed. They caught someone at 2 a.m. It just wasn't who Grace expected, and it wasn't, she would realize too late, the whole truth. The plan was simple. Grace stayed on as night nurse, ordinary and invisible, while Enzo's men watched the corridor feed without interfering, and Grace herself did the one thing no camera could. She watched the boy. And at 2:14 in the morning, the door eased open and a figure slipped in, quiet, practiced, unhurried, and crossed to Leo's bedside, and from a coat pocket produced a small dropper bottle and tilted a few careful drops into the cup of water that sat, every night, on the boy's side table. It was Sophia, Leo's aunt, Enzo's younger sister, who had been at the hospital almost every day, who had standing access at any hour, whom no one on earth would have thought to stop. Grace did not move, did not gasp, did not give herself away. She simply watched, the way 15 years had taught her, and noted everything. The practiced ease, the familiarity, the way Sophia smoothed the boy's hair afterward with what looked unmistakably like love. And then she stepped out of the shadow by the window and said, very quietly, "I'd like to know what's in the bottle before he drinks it." What followed was the scene Enzo had wanted from the start, and Grace had stopped, except now it happened with the proof in hand. Sophia, caught, did not deny it. She broke, the way people break when a secret they've carried alone finally has weight pressing on it from outside. And the story that came out was not the story of a murderer. It was something sadder and more human, and for several minutes it looked, to everyone in that room, like the answer. The drops, Sophia wept, were a herbal tincture, a traditional remedy their grandmother had sworn by, the same one their own mother had given them as children whenever they were sick. When the doctor's treatment hadn't worked, when Leo kept getting worse, Sophia had panicked. She didn't trust the cold, expensive specialists. She trusted the medicine of her own childhood, the medicine of the women in her family,
and she had been giving it to Leo every night in secret because she was terrified, because she couldn't bear to do nothing, because she loved him and the doctors were failing him and she'd had to try something. She hadn't told anyone because she knew they'd stop her, and she'd been so sure it was helping. She'd had no idea. She sobbed it, broken, no idea she might have been the thing making him worse. And it fit. That was the dangerous part. It fit beautifully. A frightened aunt, a folk remedy, a secret born of love and panic. It explained the nightly schedule, the substance off the chart, the access no one questioned. Enzo's face had gone through fury into something like grief. This was his sister, his blood, and she'd nearly killed his son out of love. Even Ashby looked for a moment satisfied. Here was an answer that was nobody's medical fault, a contaminant introduced by a hysterical relative. Case closed. The room exhaled. It was over. Except Grace wasn't exhaling.
Grace was looking at the dropper bottle in the evidence bag and at her own notebook, and something wasn't sitting right. The same itch that had started all of this. The small, wrong thing that wouldn't let her rest.
"How long?" she asked Sophia quietly. "Have you been giving it to him?" "Since the 4th night," Sophia wept. "When he got worse. I couldn't watch any more. The 4th night I started." And there it was. The thing that didn't fit. Grace opened her notebook to the page she'd kept from the very beginning, and her voice, when it came, was gentle, but absolutely certain. "The nightly fever spike doesn't start on the 4th night," she said. "It's here on night 1, night 2, night 3, before you ever gave him a single drop, Sophia. I logged it myself." She looked up, and the room's relief curdled into something colder.
Sophia's tincture is real, and she should never have given it to him, and we need to test it and flush it. But it is not what started this. Something was already happening to Leo on a schedule 3 nights before she ever touched that water. Which means, and she felt the floor of the case shift under her even as she said it, there are 2 things going on in this room. Sophia's drops, and something else, something earlier, something we still haven't found. She closed the notebook. "We didn't catch the person making Leo sick tonight. We caught a frightened aunt who walked into the middle of it. The real one is still here, and now they know we're looking." The silence that followed was different from the others, because everyone in that room understood at once what it meant. The comfortable answer had just dissolved, and underneath it was a far worse one. Someone had been doing this before Sophia, with more skill and more secrecy. Someone who hadn't been caught on the very first night they watched, which meant someone careful, someone who knew how to time it, someone who perhaps had seen tonight's trap coming and simply hadn't come. And Grace, looking around at the faces in that room, Sophia crumpled and weeping, Ashby gray, Enzo's men by the door, the night resident, the whole expensive ecosystem of people with reasons to be near Leo Catalano, understood the most dangerous thing of all. Whoever had started this was still standing inside the circle of people they trusted. They had just watched Sophia take the fall, and they now knew that the only person standing between them and a clean escape was a heavyset night nurse with a notebook, the one person who'd refused twice now to accept the easy answer everyone else was so relieved to believe. The real one didn't come at 2 a.m. anymore. That was the first thing Grace understood as the next night passed empty. No figure at the door, no drops, nothing. Whoever it was had seen Sophia caught, had watched the trap close on the wrong person, and had gone still. They were waiting her out. And the cruel arithmetic of it was this. With Sophia's tincture stopped and the steroids halted, Leo should have been improving. And for a day, he did. Then, on the second night, without warning, he crashed. It came fast and it came hard, the boy's small body seizing into a fever far higher than anything on the 9-day chart, his oxygen dropping, the monitors screaming. And in the chaos of it, the crash team, the orders flying, the father held back by his own men at the door, Grace saw the thing that finally cracked the case open. Because in the middle of the emergency, one person moved with a fraction too much certainty.
Dr. Renner, Elias Renner, the family's private physician, the quiet, trusted doctor Enzo had kept on retainer for years, the man who had been in and out of that suite for 9 days without anyone ever logging him as a visitor, because he wasn't a visitor, he was staff, reached for a medication and had it drawn before anyone called for it. He knew what was happening to Leo before the labs did. You only know that fast when you already know the cause. Grace caught his wrist. "What did you just draw?" And in the half-second Renner hesitated, the half-second of a careful man caught one beat off his rhythm. Grace read the whole thing, the way she'd read the clock, the way she read everything. "You knew the dose," she said. "You knew before the labs, because you're the one who's been managing this from the beginning, not treating it, managing it." She didn't let go of his wrist. "Mr. Catalano, don't let anyone give Leo anything that man drew. Use the crash protocol, Dr. Ashby's orders, buy the book, nothing from Renner's hand. Now." They stabilized Leo on the standard protocol. He held, and in the terrible adrenaline quiet afterward, with the boy breathing and the monitors calmed, the truth came apart in Renner's hands. Because Grace had been right that he wasn't a killer, and a man who isn't a killer cannot hold a secret together once it's been seen. It had started, Renner confessed, on the very first night, before Sophia, before Ashby's diagnosis hardened. A dosing error, his error. In those first frightened hours, he'd given Leo a medication at an adult-scaled dose, a mistake born of haste and exhaustion, the kind of thing that should have been caught and corrected and disclosed. And it had hurt the boy, set off the very cascade of symptoms that everyone, including Ashby, had then misread as a disease. That was the moment that defined everything after. Renner could have confessed on night 1. The harm was reversible then. Instead, he had panicked. A private physician to a family like the Catalanos does not survive admitting he poisoned the air through carelessness, and he had made the choice that turned a survivable mistake into a 9-day nightmare. He had covered it.
He'd quietly continued administering the same agent in small nightly doses, timed to keep the symptoms looking like a consistent disease progression, because a steady illness pointed at biology, while a sudden recovery would have begged the question of what had changed. And what had changed was him, stopping. He'd been keeping Leo sick, a little every night, to keep his own catastrophic error from ever surfacing. Not to kill him, to hide. "You let them treat him for the wrong thing for 9 days, Enzo said, and his voice was the quietest it had ever been, which was the most frightening thing Grace had heard all week. "You watched me, by his bed. You sat with me." He did not move toward Renner. He didn't have to. The men by the door had already shifted. "My son almost died tonight so that you wouldn't have to admit you made a mistake." "It was an accident," Renner started. "The first one was an accident," Grace said, and she said it for Enzo because she could see he needed the line drawn clean, and he was past drawing it himself. Everything after the first night was a choice. You had 100 chances to save him simply by telling the truth, and every single night you chose your reputation over this child's life. That's not an accident, Dr. Renner. That's the 9 most cowardly nights I've ever seen a doctor commit. She turned away from him. Done. He was, to her, already nothing, and went to the boy. What happened to Elias Renner did not happen in that room, and Grace did not ask. She had a patient. With the true cause finally named, the agent, the dosing, the 9-day timeline laid out in her notebook and now in the chart, Ashby could at last treat the right thing, cleanly, without the noise, and the underlying illness Leo had actually come in with turned out to be the small, manageable thing it had always been once the poison hiding it was stripped away. The boy's numbers began, for the first time in 10 days, to climb the right direction. By dawn, for the first time since the night it all began, Leo Catalano was unmistakably, measurably, getting better. And the heavy-set night nurse the department head had called useless on the first night sat by the boy's bed in the gray morning light, watching the proof of it tick across the monitor, while his father stood in the doorway and watched her and understood, fully and finally, what he had almost lost and who had refused to let him lose it. Recovery, Grace knew better than anyone, is not a moment. It is a slow surfacing. And the days that followed were the strange, tender, exhausted days that come after a long fear finally breaks. Leo got better the way children do once the thing hurting them is gone, faster than the adults around him could quite believe, as though his small body had only been waiting for permission. The fever broke and stayed broken. The color came back to his face. By the third day he was sitting up, demanding to know where his tablet was and whether the hospital had any food that wasn't sad, and negotiating, with the full force of his returning personality, for a later bedtime. Grace, who had seen too many children not get better, found herself standing in the doorway more than once just to watch him be 8 years old again. It never got old. It was the whole reason she'd survived 15 years of the job. She stayed on his case through the recovery. Enzo had insisted, and for once, Ashby hadn't argued. Ashby, in fact, had become a quietly different man in the aftermath. Whatever reckoning he'd had with himself in private, the version that emerged was less armored, and one afternoon he stopped Grace in the hall and said, without preamble, "I've been doing this 30 years. I'd stopped listening to anyone below me on the chart. You caught what I couldn't, because you were willing to sit with a problem I'd already decided I'd solved." A pause, stiff but real. "I've recommended the hospital review night shift observations as part of formal diagnostics. Your notebook is going to change how this ward works. I wanted you to hear that from me." It wasn't an apology, exactly. But from a man like Ashby, Grace understood, it was something rarer, a correction. She took it for what it was, and thanked him, and let it be enough. But it was the nights that changed her in the end. Because Enzo Catalano kept finding reasons to be there during her shifts, and Grace, who was honest with herself even when it was inconvenient, stopped pretending she didn't notice. The fear that had thrown them together was gone now, and what was left underneath it, in the quiet hours when Leo slept easily and there was nothing left to save, was just the two of them. A man and a woman who had been through something real, talking in the dark, discovering they liked talking in the dark. He brought her coffee the way she actually took it, which meant he'd paid attention. He asked her about her life, the 15 years, the patients she'd lost, the ones she'd saved. The reason a woman that good had spent her career on the shift nobody respected. And Grace found herself telling him things she didn't tell people. That she'd chosen nights on purpose years ago, because nights were where she was needed most and watched least. And that she'd built a whole life out of being the one who saw without being seen. "It sounds lonely," Enzo said one night. "It was a choice," Grace said. And then, because she'd promised herself a long time ago never to lie to make a hard thing sound softer. "And yes, sometimes it was lonely." "You looked straight through me the first night," Enzo said after a while. "Past the name, past all of it. You weren't afraid of me, and you weren't impressed by me. Do you have any idea how long it's been since someone looked at me and just saw a person?" He wasn't performing now. She'd never once seen him perform. "I keep finding reasons to be on this ward at 2 a.m. I think you've noticed. I think you're too kind to make me say it badly, and too honest to pretend you haven't." Grace was quiet for a moment. She was a careful woman, and this was the most dangerous thing she'd faced all week. More dangerous than Ashby, more dangerous than the crisis, because it was the one thing she couldn't solve with attention and patience and a notebook. "I've noticed," she said finally.
I'd have to be a bad nurse not to notice. A small smile, but her eyes were serious. But your son is my patient, Enzo, and he is still getting well. And I am not going to be one more thing that happens to this family in a hospital room. Whatever this is, and I think we both know it's something, it doesn't get to start here. Not while he's still in that bed. She held his gaze, steady as she'd been the first night. Get your son home. Get him well. And then, if you still find yourself looking for reasons, she let it rest there, unhurried, certain. You won't have to make any of them up. And Enzo Catalano, who had spent a lifetime taking what he wanted the moment he wanted it, found that the waiting she was asking of him didn't feel like denial at all. It felt like being, for the first time and longer than he could remember, genuinely respected by someone who had nothing to gain from him. He nodded. He didn't push. And in the quiet of that room, with the boy breathing easily between them, something settled into place that neither of them needed to name yet. A promise, with no words in it, waiting, patient, for the right side of a hospital door.
Leo Catalano went home 11 days after the night it all began, walking out under his own power with a backpack he'd insisted on carrying himself, pausing at the door of the suite to inform Grace, with great solemnity, that he had decided on the marine biologist after all. Because pirates don't have dental, Grace had laughed, really laughed, the kind she didn't often spend on the job, and told him the ocean was lucky to have him. And then, the most important patient of her career walked out into the sunlight on his father's hand. Well, and that, she told herself, was supposed to be the end of it. It wasn't, of course. She'd known it wouldn't be since the night in the dim room when she told a dangerous man to wait. But Grace was a careful woman who had built a life out of not hoping for things. And so, for 3 weeks, she let herself believe the story had closed the way her stories usually did, with the patient saved, the family gone home, and the night nurse moving on to the next bed, unseen the way she'd always been. She did not expect him to come back. Men like that, she'd told herself, mean it in the hospital and forget it in the world. He came back on a Tuesday. He was waiting outside the staff entrance at the end of her shift, in the grey light before dawn, with 2 coffees made exactly the way she took them. And Grace stopped on the steps and felt the careful thing she'd built around her own heart for 15 years go quietly, finally, still. Leo's well, he said. He's home. He's driving the entire household insane, demanding a saltwater aquarium. A pause. And then the most powerful man in the city looked at the night nurse he'd once been told to ignore and said it plainly, the way she'd taught him without ever meaning to. He's well, Grace. Which means he's not your patient anymore. Which means I'm out of reasons. Except the real one. I didn't come for a nurse. I came for you. I've been finding my way to 2 a.m. for a month, and I'd like to stop pretending it's about anything but the woman who looked straight through me and wasn't afraid of what she saw. Grace looked at him for a long moment. This man, these coffees, this impossible thing arriving on the steps of the building where she'd spent 15 years being invisible. And then she did the thing she was best at. She told the truth. I spent my whole life learning to be the one who sees and doesn't get seen, she said. It was safe there. Nobody looks at the fat night nurse, and I told myself I preferred it that way. She took the coffee from his hand, and her fingers were steady, the way they'd been steady through every crisis of her career. And then you looked, and you didn't look away. Do you know how rare that is in a whole life? A breath. So here are my terms, Enzo Catalano, because I'm too old and too good at what I do to start something on anyone's terms but my own. I'm not a woman you rescued. I saved your son. I keep my work. I keep my name. I keep the parts of me that don't fit your world. And I will tell you the truth even when you'd rather I didn't, especially then. You already know I will. The first easy smile. Take all of it or none of it. All of it, Enzo said,
without a half-second's hesitation. And the most dangerous man in the city said it like a man who knew exactly how lucky he was.
And there, in the grey dawn outside the staff door, on the right side of it, the way she'd asked, he kissed her, unhurried and certain, the kind of kiss that isn't a beginning so much as an arrival. The fat night nurse they'd called useless on the worst night of a powerful man's life had walked out of that hospital with everything she'd never let herself want. Not because anyone gave it to her, but because she'd refused, one patient and one impossible night at a time, to be smaller than she was.
They told her she was just a night nurse, useless, beneath the medicine. And she sat in the dark at 2 a.m. and caught the one thing every brilliant, certain person in that room had missed. Not because she was the loudest, but because she was the only one still paying attention. So tell me in the comments, did you trust Renna before the end, or did you see it coming? And here's the question I really want you to answer. Has the world ever looked at you and decided you were just something, and been completely wrong about it? Tell me your story below. I read every single one. If Grace's story meant something to you, do me a favor and subscribe, because the next woman they underestimate is even stronger than this one. I'll see you there.